Szanowni Państwo,
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Polish Institute of Foreign Relations and the German Council on Foreign Relations, I'd like to welcome you to the debate of Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Poland and Germany on the future of Europe. Welcome to Mr. Heiko Maas, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany. Welcome to Jacek Czaputowicz, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland. And a very warm welcome to Daniela Schwarza, Director of the Council on Foreign Relations, who agreed to moderate, together with me, this meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, we have agreed that the ministers will introduce our conversations, and then, together with Daniela, we will ask one question each, and then you will have the opportunity to ask the ministers, and finally, any outstanding questions will come from me and Daniela. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to pass the floor to Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Germany, Heiko Maas, who, it so happens, decided to become a politician 30 years ago when the Yalta system was crumbling, when Germany was being unified, the Iron Curtain was falling, and the unfinished business related to the Yalta division of Europe was being addressed. Europe was becoming united. Today we're talking about the unity of Europe 30 years later. Minister, what future lies in store for us?
Vielen Dank. Ich freue mich, hier zu sein.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy that I can participate in this meeting. Within 1 year, last year, I'm here for the 4th time. And if the Federal Minister of Foreign Affairs visits Poland within 12 months 4 times to meet the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, I think it just goes to show that the partnership between our countries is strong, and this is very important to me. I don't know if it was exactly 30 years ago that I made my decision to become a politician, but indeed I did have to make a decision whether I want to pursue a university career or I want to get involved in politics. At the time, I opted to get involved in politics. My professor regretted my decision, and he said it's a pity that now my career is going to go downwards. In foreign policy, we are addressing, or in politics, we're dealing with issues that are pertinent to the citizens. And I'm very happy that this event dedicated to the future of Europe brought together many young people, because it's about your future first and foremost. That's why when Jacek and me are meeting, Europe is always a topic that we discussed. Europe, not limited to the European Union. We talked about Western Balkans today. It's an important topic, and I'm very happy that the Polish government is so engaged in promoting the Berlin process. Of course, we ask ourselves a question, what next for the European Union? So perhaps a few words of introduction. I'm very much convinced that our future lies in Europe. And with any discussions that are ongoing in Europe, with all the difficulties and challenges, we are still living in times where we need not just more of Europe. All the challenges that we're facing, they are very varied. Globalization, digitization, climate change. But all these challenges have one thing in common. They are borderless. globalization has an international dimension, and the same is true for climate change, because national borders, wherever they are, on the land or on the sea, they're not important when you consider topics such as climate change. World Wide Web is also supranational. It's about overcoming barriers and borders. So we in Europe have to think about addressing these challenges. I always say, to demonstrate what I want to say, I quote Paul-Henri Spaak, one of the founding fathers of the European Union, former Prime Minister of Belgium. He said that there are two types of countries in Europe: small countries and countries which have not noticed that they're small yet. And I think many years after he said that, it's still very much valid. Right now, we are at a moment where we see new competition rising between superpowers, the United States and others, and we in Europe have to consider what role we want to play globally, where we want to be one of the decision makers or just those about whom decisions are made. If we do not rise to the challenges, if we don't find a European response, we will just be an object of world politics, and others will make decisions for us. We will just have to live with the consequences, and that's why Europe and the European Union are a challenge. It would be a mistake, it would be a false move to say that the European Union is at its best at the moment. There are many internal conflicts, issues, not just the issue of migration, where we do not share a position, but I still think that things are not as bad as they are sometimes portrayed to be. I think we all share this understanding, this insight, and I think it applies to most in the European Union, that in the times where we see America, China, or Russia first, we can give a single response in terms of our values and interests, and the response has to be Europe united. That's why we are thinking about influencing the migration process, the European institutions, how we can develop them further. It's not just about German and French initiatives. It's first and foremost about countries such as Germany and Poland working together, agreeing positions, and deciding about the future of Europe and their interests together, because Europe cannot fail because of some conflict between North and South or East or West, and that's why we need to reach agreement on many things. It's important not just for Germany and France to be in consultation, it's also important for Germany and Poland to find common answers to the challenges. We need to be the driving force behind the European project. If it fails, it will be to the detriment of all. That's why we need to address such issues. As for what is particularly relevant for us in foreign policy, in recent weeks, with regard to various topics such as Venezuela or Libya, we could see that a big majority in the EU tends to agree. But sometimes just one country has a different opinion, and as a result, we cannot reach consensus on a common position. We in Germany think that in the Council of Foreign Ministers, there is this principle of anonymity. I don't know if it's beneficial. Countries such as Russia or China are always trying to split Europe and pursue their interests this way. These are the topics that we need to look at. We need to organize ourselves. The European Union needs to develop further. We have to talk about it. and we have to find a common position vis-à-vis the important challenges that I mentioned. For me, it is essential that the response has to be a European response. We have to do something about it, even more than in the past, because we're living in the times when, due to the many problems, we have to think in a more comprehensive way. If I look at European policy and beyond, I see that we tend to adopt short-sighted, short-term strategies. That's why we need to do something about it. Finishing, I'd like to emphasize one other thing that is very important, since we have many young people here. I'm born in the 60s, so I'm not very young anymore, but freedom, rule of law, and wealth is not something that I had to fight for. It was already there when I was born. And people like me who are raised in Europe, it being as it is, we take it for granted that it's always going to be like that. And it's not the case. The values that we have adopted are under threat because of various international trends, nationalist trends. We're living in the times when we should not only live by the values, we should also defend the values that are dear to us. If it's happening under the umbrella of the European Union, where these values are anchored, I think that this is something that we urgently need to address. We need Europe united to give a response.
Sehr knapper Zeit sehr deutlich gemacht, wie sehr wir von Europa profitieren, wie stark wir im Alltag eigentlich Europa erleben können. Aber Sie haben gleichzeitig auch unterstrichen, wie groß die Herausforderungen von
Thank you for this interesting intervention. You also mentioned the pressure, the very strong pressure on Europe, and that Europe has to defend itself again if it's to cope with the challenges. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this Polish-German dialogue and talk about the future. I would now like to address Mr. Jacek Czaputowicz to take the floor.
Cieszę się z tego spotkania.
I'm very happy to be here at this meeting. When we signed the joint declaration of the Polish and German ministers in November about our mutual relations, we agreed to carry out a debate about the future of the EU. And this meeting today, to me, is that pledge coming true. It is important to talk in this context of public consultations and to exchange our opinions with the young generation of people. We're in Poland, so it's probably mostly Polish young people, but we also need to talk to our foreign partners. We have participated in the Berlin process, which is a German initiative to bring Western Balkan states closer to the EU standards. And that's another important meeting for Poland. Poland has a program of sharing our know-how and experiences. The minister mentioned our mutual contacts, and an expression of our foreign policy's rapprochement was my participation in April in the UN Security Council briefing. Germany, which is now a member of the Security Council, so is Poland. Germany organized this debate, and I participated in a debate on human rights, non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and other important topics in the sphere of international affairs. Poland will have its chairmanship in August, and we're hoping for a very good cooperation with Germany, Austria, and other EU countries as far as the working out of our joint position is concerned. We have similar interests and similar opinions, and the position of the European members of the Security Council, France, Belgium, and the United Kingdom, in addition to our countries, have a position on Golan Heights and not acknowledging the aggression there, which is not related to Europe itself, but it shows our understanding of global threats to security and our willingness to cooperate. This meeting is taking place on the 15th anniversary of Poland joining the EU, which is something we appreciate very much. Our economy is growing very well. 15 years ago, we were at about 40% of the average EU GDP. Today, we are at 70% of the average EU GDP per capita. And the Polish people are very much aware of that, and we are happy to see this prosperity which is being developed and our participation in the EU. Poland is growing at as much as 5% per year, which means that we are also contributing to the growth of the EU as a whole and to the growth of the EU's importance in the world. It is necessary to reform some of the economies that are staying behind or lagging behind, because Europe has to be strong, democratic, efficient, and it has to be unified without any divisions into different speeds, different groups, and so forth. Only a single, unified Europe can be an important partner globally. I am happy to see that in terms of competitiveness and economic liberalism, we have similar views. There are the four foundations of the free flow of goods, services, capital, and also workers. And all of these freedoms contribute to the EU's meaning and importance in the world. Looking at how the EU is managed, this is how we are evaluated and assessed by others. However, there are certain threats there. There is a tendency to protectionism, which might be explained by people trying to limit certain freedoms, for example, the freedom of services. And a good example of this is such solutions as the Posting of Workers Directive, for example. But we are perceiving this as a willingness to defend status quo. Instead of reforming economies, some countries would like to limit competition. And that is a threat, because the economic foundations in Poland and in this part of Europe depend on that. But Germany, for example, also depends on a healthy economic system and healthy principles. So there is this threat of some of the tendencies that we've got to counteract. We should have a mandate from our voters. The so-called deficit of democracy results from the EU citizens not really feeling responsible for the process. And hence there's a rampant Euroscepticism, especially in Western European countries. We are fortunate here in Poland, and according to EU studies, European Commission studies, the Polish society is the single most pro-EU society in Europe. But in many other countries, Euroscepticism is on a rise. And this is, in our opinion, the result of not having the feeling of having any influence on the European project and not being to participate in it. When we look at the decisions of the British society to leave the EU, we believe that some of the guilt and some of the blame is on the EU. The British decided the way they did because they became disenchanted about not having influence on how the EU develops. Reforms are necessary, so the discussion about the future of the EU and the European integration, for example, at the Sibiu summit, and then we've got the election for the European Parliament and so forth. So hopefully all of this will contribute to us being able to work out a common vision to increase the feeling among European citizens that they have a say. How do we get the democratic mandate? The answer is quite obvious, we believe. Namely, we have to use the currently existing mechanisms. National parliaments is one thing, because that is where the process of expressing democratic opinions is the strongest. So for the EU to have the support of the member states, it is the member states that have to have the biggest say in determining policies. And as Minister Maas mentioned, this is also to do with the majority voting on foreign and security policy. This, in our opinion, might eliminate certain important actors, namely certain countries and societies, from the decision-making process. In the UN, we have the Security Council, of course, which in a way represents the Council, but the global community is much more varied and diverse than the European community. We believe it is possible to find consensus in the EU about foreign and defense policy. For example, we have managed to maintain the sanctions against Russia, and this was possible thanks to everybody trying to find consensus, even though some countries might be willing to give up on the sanctions. Yesterday, on the other hand, we managed to develop a joint position vis-à-vis the UK, even though some countries had a different opinion. So the EU of 28, or maybe 27 soon, is homogeneous enough, as far as the directions of foreign policy are concerned, that looking for consensus in foreign policy would be the best solution, in our opinion. So some of the opinions to have more of majority voting are not substantiated, in our opinion. Granted, we have not been able to adopt a joint policy on the redistribution of refugees. Some countries, including Poland, were against it, but looking back in hindsight, wasn't it a good decision? What Poland and other countries in Central Europe were saying is now more and more being taken as correct in Germany and other countries, that opening your borders completely and then shipping the refugees between different countries is not the way forward, and that it is better indeed to act outside. So this is it by way of my preliminary comments about these problems, and hopefully during the discussion we will be able to pick up on some of the items concerning our vision of the EU of the future.
Es ist deutlich geworden aus beiden Eingangsstatements, wie wichtig aus
Thank you very much, Minister. Both these interventions show us how important it is, from the point of view of both Poland and Germany, that the EU is able to operate effectively. Minister, you mentioned internal unity of the EU. You mentioned the common market, the basic freedoms, economy, and others. Well, this is quite a unique year because we have the election to the European Parliament, and then the European Commission will have a new opening. So how can we generate positive impulses for the EU in Poland, in Germany, in the meantime, to make sure that the whole system works. Certainly, bilateral cooperation is very important. So where are the most important points there? I would like to add one more thing to this question. The United Kingdom is in the process of leaving the EU. We don't know how the process will end, but let's assume that as a result of that, the number of the EU members will go down. So the question is as follows. Perhaps we will be back to that problem that some countries are smaller than others. If the UK leaves, won't Germany be too big for a smaller EU? Isn't that a source of worry for you, ministers?
Nein, also weder Deutschland ist zu groß, noch die Europäische Union ist zu klein.
No, I don't think that Germany is too big for Europe, with or without the British. I would like for this topic to be finally over. It is taking up a lot of our time and effort in the EU, and it obscures other things that remain unsolved. But we do have to solve this issue, of course. However, it is one of the topics where Poland and Germany are cooperating with each other very closely, I believe. Poland certainly has very close relations with the UK. There are many Polish citizens there. So this is a topic that's important for all of us. And our interests are in line as far as this is concerned. So we need to consult each other very closely. The same goes for the multilateral financial framework. It has not been possible to adopt them until 2021. Perhaps things will be more difficult in the second half of the year. Then Germany takes over the Council. That's the second half of next year. And some people are saying that they would like to postpone some of the issues until that time, because people say, you Germans have a lot of experience, you are large, you have lots of resources, so you can deal with that. I don't really think this is a very constructive approach, and these topics remain very important. Now, about the added value from a close cooperation between Poland and Germany, from what we've seen, if you look at Europe, it seems sometimes there is a Western European vision and an Eastern European vision. But if our positions, the position of Poland and Germany, are in line with each other, then it is us that bring together different points of view. Both Germany and Poland are in the center of Europe. Germany doesn't only represent the West, Poland doesn't only represent the East. And we do have good relations, so we can be the intermediaries. And that's another benefit of the good Polish-German relations. And now, when the UK leaves, the EU will not be too small. After what's happened in recent weeks and months in the UK, I believe that many people would be happy if the referendum had had a different result. But the outcome is what it is, so now we have to sort out Brexit and also the period after Brexit to make sure that the UK remains a very close partner for Europe. Just like other European countries like Norway or Switzerland. The UK is not only important because of its economic strength, but also for security policy. So irrespective of the decision made by the House of Commons, we must make sure that this process is not to the detriment and that is not injurious to the British all the Europeans. So Germany will not be any larger when the UK leaves, but perhaps the centers of gravity in the EU will shift. The axis of Germany, France, UK will no longer exist. So other countries such as Italy, Poland, Spain will have to step up and redefine their roles. So this is an opportunity. And it's encouraging. So as far as bilateral cooperation is concerned, we are trying to lay the foundation for those processes. So, no, I don't think that Germany will be too big, especially that everything was all right in the past. The policy of the federal government must not be that of finger-pointing, but of an outstretched hand. And this is how we run our federal ministry's foreign policy.
Bardzo istotnych pytań, ale
A number of important questions, but Madam Director asked about bilateral relations. I think they are good in general. The Polish and German public, the trade cooperation. Germany is our biggest partner, much bigger than all the other partners. Of course, there were some tensions in political relations. How could you diagnose the reasons for them? Well, I think it was linked to the relations of the German authorities with the previous Polish government of the civic platform. It took some time to make new choices, to accept that there's been a change of government to the government of law and justice. The process of cooperation is taking place, and it's moving in the right direction. One fact that was important, Poland proposed Jacek Saryusz-Wolski in the elections for the council president. Donald Tusk from Poland, but not a Polish candidate, was chosen. The fact will be commented in different ways, because the other member states have opted for a national of a country which did not nominate that person. If we opted of the leader of the opposition in another country, we imposed this nomination on the member state, I think that that would result in loss of trust. And that was the case in terms of political elites. We're not questioning legality. We accept that this was a choice. In our opinion, this was not the right choice. We want Donald Tusk to be as efficient as possible during his term of office. He's responsible for the EU, for Brexit, but this shows certain issues. Minister Heiko Maas talked about values. I think he referred to the Poland being criticized in terms of observing EU law and European principles, the reform of the judiciary. I was in charge of this topic myself. I talked to the representatives of the European Union. In our opinion, this is about implementing a political program. It is a justified program. We say that similar solutions exist in other countries. I know that Heiko Maas was Minister of Justice. The nomination of judges in Germany is much more politicized than in Poland, for example. So we have something that we could call double standards here. Lack of acceptance for the sovereign choice of Central European countries, including Poland, from some of elites, and this is changing. It's a positive phenomenon, but it is still a problem of political debate. As we all know, Poland is implementing all the decisions of the Court of Justice, also referring to the Supreme Court reform. I think this is the normal way to behave. We are a leader in terms of observing the law and implementing the decisions of the Court of Justice. But let's leave the legal things to lawyers. But if they are handled by politicians who are involved in electoral campaigns. Franz Timmermans, vice president of the European Commission, was in Poland, and he attended an electoral meeting of one of the left parties, and he encouraged people to vote for that party because he is a leader of a party to which Heiko Maas also belongs. For us, the European Union and the European Commission should be neutral politically. So if it is otherwise, it's a violation of certain standards. But still, Poles are not as reluctant to support the European Union as other countries. We see that Eurosceptic tendencies are clear in some Western European countries. Director Dembski talked about the strength of Germany. I would like to point to one aspect. I became a professor, unlike Heiko Maas. So I first became a professor, and then I moved on to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So I'm part of the academia, and one of the areas of my academic research is the European Union. So one question: how the exit of the United Kingdom would influence the voting power of countries in the Council, in the Lisbon system. We run some calculations, and Germany, according to our calculations, will be even stronger in terms of their voting power. So it will be even more difficult to pursue a decision opposed by the tandem of Germany and France. So other countries will lose the opportunity to influence European politics. That's why we need to stay with the principle of consensus. Poland proposed at the time a different system. Different decisions were taken. So there are some significant deficits of the system that we will have to address. And this also applies to issues such as the vote of every single citizen of the EU being equal or not. Whether the votes of citizens of bigger countries such as Germany are not more important than the votes of citizens of smaller countries such as Austria. We need to address this. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now we'd like to encourage you to ask questions. Michał Baranowski, head of GMF in Warsaw. It's my great pleasure to see the ministers and Daniela. My question is about European security. A question to both ministers. How things have developed over the recent months and weeks, but also your definitions of an issue that is particularly important, the definition of strategic autonomy. And how does that tie in with transatlantic relations and the presence of the United States? A second question. I have a question to the minister. You said that France and Germany should work closer with Poland. Do you have anything in the drawer? Do you have any projects for Poland? If Poland would like to have influence, not just the German and French tandem. What specifically would you like to do, Minister, to influence the European Union politics together? Two important questions on transatlantic relations and security. When Heiko Maas was listing the challenges, he mentioned China, Russia, United States. We need to be integrated. That's not how we see it. We differentiate between the challenges presented to Europe by Russia and China and, on the other hand, the United States. We see ourselves as part of the free world. Transatlantic relations are of paramount importance to us. When we are talking about security, we always think about the United States. There is, of course, the defense and security dimension in the EU, but it's not powerful enough to guarantee the security. That's why I see certain differences between some European countries, such as Germany and France in particular, and the United States, and this worries us. Strategic autonomy is a challenge. If it is to serve to boost the military potential of the European Union and the member states, then I'm all for it. But if it's about becoming independent from the United States and excluding from transatlantic relations, we would be very concerned about this. So there is a certain difference. Of course, Poland does want to be involved in security and defense identity, integration, or boosting the military capacity of the member states of NATO, European members. Still, we want to be a leader in the European Union in terms of maintaining good transatlantic relations. Dr. Wada asked a question about any projects. Well, I often hear that the driving forces are France and Germany, but I still think that Poland does have a lot of say. Vision of the European Union, the unity of Europe, avoiding Europe of speeds is our success. In economic development, Poland and Central European countries are boosting overall growth of the European economy and its importance worldwide. Some other countries are dragging Europe down. They're not able to reform the economy. They're not able to meet the requirements related to budgetary deficit. So we are very much part of the European Union and one of the countries who have influence. I talked about the cooperation also in the Security Council. We are part of this project. So I also see a certain proximity of the positions of Poland and Germany in terms of how we perceive the relations in NATO. I agree that with regard to the relations with France, they need to get better. We have the ambassador Pierre Levy. We are constantly talking. We're talking about various visits, but I can give you an example. A decision on further steps with regard to the United Kingdom is more to the liking of Poland than France. And saying that we have no influence is just a cliche. No, we think that we are shaping the policy.
Ich würde gerne etwas zunächst zum transatlantischen Verhältnis sagen.
Let me first tackle the transatlantic relations. They have changed over recent years, and that's for sure. I don't think this is because we want to be excluded or want to leave these relations. On the contrary, we need to invest in these relations because the political situation in Washington, D.C. has changed. And I'm far from saying that everything will be different if there is a different president in the States. I believe that this is a structural shift which is taking place, and this is something we need to think about in Europe and try to find answers. In the past, as far as especially security issues were concerned, in the future we'll have to take over more responsibility, especially as far as security is concerned, and that's why the strategic dimension is very important. But we're only beginning as far as this debate is concerned. In security policy, there have been some good ideas in the past, such as PESCO. There's the French idea of the intervention initiative. And as I said to Jens Stoltenberg recently, as far as the European security policy is concerned, it is not targeted against NATO, and it should not be perceived as being competitive. On the contrary, it is changing our relations for the better, and it is the US that has to decide where they want to become involved. That's why it's very important to develop further as far as this is concerned. So people might talk about a European army, but this is more of a vision than anything real. However, let me give you an example of why this would be good for Europe. One of the key things is that military issues and civilian issues are and can be combined in the EU. Within the EU, we decided that civilian enforcement will be strengthened. We will have the so-called Crisis Prevention Center in Germany, where officers will be trained on a preventive basis. So this is not going to be reacting, but preventing certain crises. In other words, we are trying to combine the different aspects better, and the EU creates a lot of new opportunities, perhaps even more than within NATO. Certainly, these things have to be discussed with NATO, but we have the European mission to Mali. Yesterday, the Bundestag extended that mission, and so what we need basically is an organized process. We've got to follow the developments, and in this respect, Poland and Germany can and must cooperate. Another two areas where I can see potentially very good cooperation is, for example, our relations with China, as the minister mentioned. China is one of the biggest strategic challenges that we are facing, and we do not have any final answers yet. China is a very important strategic partner for ourselves, for the car industry, for example, in Germany, because a lot of the profit is generated in China, not in the US or Europe. And that's why we have to have rational relations with China as far as the economy is concerned. However, at the same time, China is representing what I'd call aggressive capitalism, which is combined with financial and economic expansion and political expansion and having influence in different parts of the world. So China is becoming a competitor. We consider ourselves to be democracies. We have human rights to abide by, which is not the case for China. So there are many strategic issues to provide answers to. China is not perceiving the EU as a whole. They prefer to deal with individual countries because then they have tremendous advantage over a single European country as opposed to the EU. During the summit in Paris, it wasn't just President Macron, but also Chancellor Merkel and Mr. Juncker welcomed him together to show that it is Europe that is a partner for China, not an individual country. Another example of very good cooperation between Poland and Germany after the INF Treaty's termination. Again, we have different points of view because we have a different perception of the threat in Poland, in Germany, in Spain, in the Baltic countries, and so forth. So Poland and Germany could bring in the different points of view to this discussion and strive to achieve a solution that will be acceptable for all countries. There also was a question about cooperation with France in addition, and the Weimar Triangle being revived. And we can definitely talk about things like these and these challenges within the Weimar Triangle. And there will certainly be no shortage of topics to talk about. The objective behind many initiatives is to find an EU perspective which will be acceptable for everybody in Europe. Let me now move on with the next question. Now, I'm a student from Hessen, and I've prepared a video about the developments in 1989. And I have a question to Minister Maas. What does the EU have to do in order to help the countries that are economically lagging behind catch up? And is it possible at all? And secondly, what are your hopes concerning the election to the European Parliament, and are we facing a crisis? I'm a European Parliament candidate, and I have a question about Brexit to both ministers. My question to Minister Maas is, if Brexit happens, then will the rest of Europe be more united? Will we stand more united, or perhaps Germany, which so far was able to sort of hide behind the skeptical British, that you will now have to perhaps exert more pressure, for example, on France? And my question to Minister Czaputowicz, you said that the Brexit is also to be partly blamed on the EU. But we know that every time, if we wanted to give in to the British, we would have to either limit the freedoms of other EU member state citizens or the welfare. So let me ask you what may be a theoretical question, namely, how far would you personally go as far as concessions towards the EU are concerned if we could go through the process again? Let me just remind you, there is 6 minutes left. Sześć minut dla każdego, czy w sumie 6 minut? In the EU, we only have, in the Council, we have 3 minutes, and Jacek and myself are the only people who actually stick to this time limit. Why are you laughing? About the harmonization of the economic area, tax harmonization is an example about that. We had a difficult debate about the so-called digital tax, which did not work the way we were hoping for. But the topic of tax harmonization is certainly very important. And certain countries have dumping rates for taxes, and this is how they try to attract companies. And they introduce other types of law. For example, in the digital zone, they will have very low taxes, like in Ireland, and data protection also is the weakest in Ireland, according to the unified directive. It has been unified, but companies like Apple go to Dublin rather than anywhere else. So we have this rivalry. As far as data protection is concerned, which is increasingly important in the contemporary digital world, if we have uniform law, then it could be solved in a rational way. The same goes for taxes. It's very important, in my opinion. To pick up on your question, what can we do for the other countries to catch up? And what Mr. Heiko Maas said would actually maintain the differences between the different countries. This mechanism is there, and we are catching up as far as prosperity is concerned because of cohesion policy and the common agricultural policy. So the answer to how to achieve this objective is to maintain serious involvement of those policies in the multi-annual financial framework. And this is what Poland is fighting for. Once Poland and other countries reach the average, and then we will no longer be entitled to funding from those policies anyway. And then the money can be used for other countries which may join the EU in the meantime, or just used for other objectives. So we are using, and these mechanisms are there for the remainder of the EU to catch up with the leading countries. But we don't have enough support, or there is a trend to limit the support for the countries that are lagging behind, because there are attempts to limit the common agricultural policy and the cohesion policy. Tax harmonization and other protectionist activities would result in the countries that are already ahead of us and are richer maintaining the advanced position, and then the time for the rest of Europe to catch up would be longer. Now, as for Brexit, I was mentioning the actual moment of the referendum when the British evaluated the condition of the EU, and they made the decision they no longer trusted the EU. However, I was not talking about the actual process of arriving at the agreement or the so-called deal. Now, the worst thing would be for them to leave without a deal. Having a deal will safeguard the interests of EU citizens, for example, Poles. So if agreement is reached, we will be for it, even though we would be very happy to see the British stay in the EU. Perhaps this is not out of the question yet. But even if they do leave, they will remain an important partner for us. But the EU will not be more uniform, because the UK will remain present in our policy. Here in the Central and Eastern Europe, for example, we have good bilateral relations, and they will remain so. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our meeting with the foreign ministers of Poland and Germany. I'm sure that everybody would like for the meeting to go on longer and for us to get a chance to talk about these European issues more. So hopefully this will be a new tradition of these meetings. And let me thank Daniel Schwarzer for chairing the meeting. And as for all of you, I would like you to give a big round of applause to the ministers. Thank you.